Welcome everyone to this new episode of the Privacy Rules Privacy Espresso Series. Together with me, I have today Wout Platteau from the law firm Timelex based in Belgium. And we are pleased, as we always do through our series, to discuss about matters related to privacy, data protection, but also cybersecurity and crisis communication as well. And in the case of today, what I'm going to discuss with you about is a very interesting, let's say, comparison, the one of the NIS2 that we probably all know pretty well, but one other that is a bit less known, which is the CER, because one of the key issues is that those two regimes both might be active when you are facing incidents and you have to respond to them. But in order to know more about this topic, we have indeed Wout with us. So Wout, first of all, thanks a lot for being with us today. My question to you to start better understanding of this topic, as I was saying, we know a lot about these two and how these affect businesses, but much less around CER. So what can you give us an understanding on what we're talking about, and what do you think about that?
Yeah, we definitely see that a lot, and it's really a bit of a blind spot there. So you see that the two frameworks, so NIS2 and CER, they're really two sides of the same coin. So they were adopted on the very same day. They're twin directives, and they're designed to work together, right? So the goal for both is to protect critical infrastructure, but they come at it from a bit of different angles. So NIS2 is about cybersecurity, your network and information systems, but the CER is really about physical resilience. So the ability of your provider of critical services to prevent, but also to absorb and deal with and recover from physical disruptions. And that's very broad, right? So natural hazards, accidents, sabotage, or even terrorist attacks are things that they thought about when creating the CER. So NIS2 is looking at your systems, but the CER is really looking at stuff like fences, access controls, your perimeter, and your ability to keep the lights on when something physical goes wrong. So we saw a lot of noise about CER, but very little, or not little, but less definitely about CER. And I think the reason for that, or the main reason, is scoping. So NIS2 applies automatically. The moment that you meet the sector and size criteria, you're in scope by operation of law, and you as an entity, as an organization, you have to assess that for yourself. CER works differently. So this only applies once you've been formally designated as a critical entity by your competent sectoral authority. So for a lot of businesses, NIS2 is just a bigger and a more immediate issue because, more organizations will fall in this by virtue of meeting the criteria, as opposed to having that formal designation. But it's still important that they are very connected directives, and you can't treat CER and your physical resilience as a separate problem from your cyber resilience, right? The two directives are very linked. Also, for example, by virtue of if you're designated as a critical entity under the CER, you're going to immediately qualify as an essential entity under NIS2 as well. So that formal designation under the CER pulls you into the highest tier of NIS2 surveillance, and very important, regardless of your size. So your obligations might get increased, or you might get fully new obligations where you didn't if you're designated in line of CER. So they're really, the two regimes are connected by law, and they'll often also apply to the same organization responding to one incident. So if you think of like a coordinated attack, right, where you have physical intrusion, but also a cyber attack at the same time, this single event is going to trigger both frameworks. So you really shouldn't run this as two separate compliance projects, but you need one resilience strategy that covers both your cyber and your physical, and you really have one coherent plan across both.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Wow, that's really interesting. And whenever we talk about cyber, everyone normally thinks about, using the laptop and the digital area, but much less about the physical security, which is indeed still part of, the level of activities and actions that companies needs to take in order to secure indeed their company. We're in the broader sense, we always think about, giving access to servers or things like that. But probably, if I understand this correctly, we are also talking about, which measure do you take to avoid that and anyone entering your building or being able to, use a USB device to plug into the wrong laptop and things like that. That can indeed happen quite often. One of the interesting things around what you were saying in this comparison between NIS2 and CER is that they are very similar on a variety of elements then. And one of the key triggers for NIS2 is definitely the one of the responsibilities that lays behind it. What about the CER? Is it similar, it's different, or it's even deeper than NIS2?
So that's actually a very interesting contrast that the CER has with NIS2. So under NIS2, you have like this very heavy and explicit focus on specifically the board, right? You have that the management body needs to approve cybersecurity measures. You need to oversee the implementation. You need to follow training, and there's board liability if the entity does not comply with all of this. We really see that the CER does not have an equivalent to that. If you look at penalties for the CER, they're very aimed at the entity level, so the company as a legal person, rather than the board as such. So, for example, there's no CER provision that says that the board must approve the resilience plan, which is the key obligation under the CER. This resilience plan, we do still recommend that the board signs off on this, which is more, so we see that this is more to do with general company law, right? This is a very important strategic decision. Within your resilience plan, you have to answer questions very important to the functioning of your company. Like if you have a blackout, where are you going to restore service first? What parts of our company do we protect? What resources do we dedicate to this? How do we prioritize things? And these are really, those aren't operational details, especially for a critical infrastructure provider. These are really fundamental strategic choices about, your organization and how it behaves in a crisis. So, especially for these organizations that provide critical goods or critical services, this is going to be key in the way that your business works. So while there is no board requirement in the same way that there is under NIS2, to have that coherence, to have that also to underline that strategic nature of that plan, you do really want the board to engage with this as well, under kind of the same governance framework that you're doing for NIS2. So the obligations are a lot lighter, but we do recommend treating it with kind of the same gravitas that you need for NIS2 compliance.
And well, just a quick question that came on top of my mind while we were speaking. In terms of responsibility, can we say that when you are not CER compliant, you are also not NIS2 compliant, or we should keep them separate somehow?
Not automatically. It's definitely a lot. There's a degree on which you need to comply with both. So the CER is really mostly focused around that resilience plan and executing your measures, which is also a risk-based approach, right? It's a lot. There's definitely overlap, and a thing that you might improperly secure might have repercussions for both aspects of compliance. But fundamentally, there are still parts of cybersecurity that are not necessarily part of your physical security, and vice versa. Even though there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of things that are separate as well. Yes, of course.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Wout. And we as you know, the Espresso series is always very short, so I'm just going to the last point. But I would like to conclude our discussion and overview of the CER with a very practical question, which is let's step ourselves in the position of a critical infrastructure operator, which is listening to you now. What's the one thing that it should be done this week?
I think that probably just in terms of what is easy to do, like at first, right? And a very important step that you need to do is finding out who owns resilience in terms of the organization, because what we see in a lot of cases is that the answer is either very vague, or worse, it's two different people and they don't talk to each other. So that's a really common point of failure that we see that the cyber side is with the CISO, and the physical security side is often also more decentralized. That it's more when you have multiple locations that you see that they're per facility. And then you have these two separate tracks, and you're suddenly, when there's an incident that affects both your cyber and your physical security, you're doing double work for everything. So you've got two teams, you've got two notification pipelines, everything under in a very high pressure moment and situation. And it's not really something that you want to find out at the moment when this thing is happening. So really finding out who can coordinate this, and if there's no one who's currently doing this, appointing someone who will do this. It's an easy step in terms of that it's pretty basic, but it's very important in terms of aligning your physical and your cyber resilience obligations.
Thank you very much, Wout, for sharing this with us. Now our audience definitely know that there is one more framework to keep in mind and to keep an eye on. But of course, our team as Wout and the rest of the Timelex team in Belgium is happy to support for having a better understanding of these and all the other, many frameworks that are now more and more overlapping, in particular on the security/cybersecurity side of things. So Wout, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you to our audience for being with us as well. So very much looking forward to our next Privacy Espresso together, hopefully very soon with Wout as well. Bye everyone, and bye Wout.